So, my name is Karen Francis, as Sylvia just said. I'm actually I'm a medium, an evidential medium. I did a lot of my training in Britain and came out of the sort of British school of evidential mediumship, we call it. And I also do healing mediumship. And what I'll just tell you very briefly about me, and then we'll go on to talking about your relatives in the spirit world. But the reason why I really like to do these evenings is because in my experience, both of being a bereaved person and of being a medium, I find that there's an awful lot of superstition that goes around about the spirit world, about whether or not we should be communicating with the spirit world, whether or not our loved ones have gotten lost somehow between here and the spirit world, and all sorts of things that I've actually seen do considerable amount of harm to people who are recently bereaved and feeling very vulnerable. And so I do this kind of evening when I can, and Sylvia very, very generously supports the work as well, to try to educate people really on 21st century ideas of the spirit world and on what is healthy and what is not healthy when it comes to maintaining contact with our loved ones in the spirit world. And also just to allow you ask questions that you might have. I mean, I've had people come to me who've had loved ones who committed suicide. And not only are they tormented, first of all, by feeling they could have or should have done something, they're then tormented because somebody has told them, oh, well, either it was a religious figure or another medium or somebody or a psychic has told them that their loved one is roaming the world or can't get into heaven. And there's an awful lot of this done, like it's just not healing for people. What my experience of the spirit world has been, and everything I'm going to talk to you about this evening, is based on my own personal experience. Now, I don't know if anyone read the Huffington Post story that ran today, but I was a war correspondent. I was embedded with the military in Iraq. I was a political journalist for a long time. So I've come from a very skeptical, fact-based background. I've some friends of mine call me the most unlikely medium, right? And but the truth is that I actually am glad, because I used to, when I was a child, would have conversations with space in the living room, when 3 or 4, and my mother would say, "Who are you talking to?" Thinking it was an imaginary friend or somebody. And I would say the name of the person who I was talking to, and it would have some relative who had died like 2-3 generations ago. That as a 3-year-old, I couldn't possibly have known who they were. But this was fairly common in our house, much to my mother's discomfort. And then as I got older, I would just see, I could wake up in the middle of the night and there would be somebody standing at the bed, beside the bed, And I would look at them, but I was only like 10 or 12 or still quite young, at this point. And I would decide, do I know you or not? No, I don't. Okay, good night. And I'd go back to sleep, because I don't know who you are. Why am I going to talk to you? Right? You're a stranger. I'm not supposed to talk to strangers, right? Never really occurred to me. I mean, I knew that the person wasn't actually a physical person there, but it never really struck me as strange, which was saying something, I think, even then. So, but I'm Irish, so I went to Catholic school. I actually went to convent school. I spent 14 years with the nuns, which nobody should have to endure. But by the time I got out of high school, I was done. I was just done with religion. I was done with Catholicism. That was it. So I quite happily and eagerly embraced atheism and factual information, and was just and ended up then in journalism, which is in those days we really did have to fact check, so we don't they don't do anymore, but and so this is kind of where I came out of. So then my partner, my fiance, died very abruptly, and once he died, all of the things that used to happen when I was a child, that sort of stopped happening as I advanced into my teens. I mean, there were certainly things were happening throughout, but I would hear somebody say something to me clear as day, and I would think, well, wasn't that an interesting audio hallucination? Because, that's what I used to think. So, but when my partner died, all of the things that happened when I was a child started happening again with like increased intensity. So even as a child, I would see furniture move very occasionally, thankfully. My mother wouldn't have appreciated that. But sort of things started happening again, electronics turning on, and what happened very quickly in a matter of weeks was it just kind of flipped on. I was actually then back to the way I had been as a child. Now, I will clarify, I don't see people standing by the bed anymore, thankfully. I do sense people, but when I was a child, I could see them as clearly as I can see you, and I don't see people clearly like that anymore, but I can sense them, and they can communicate with me, which is more telepathically. So I teach here, so a lot of my students call me the skeptical medium, because really, I actually don't really believe anything, to be honest. I'm not one of these people. Some people have a beautiful gift of faith, and I have to be honest, I'm not one of them. What I believe because I know it, because I've experienced it. I think somebody at the Edgar Cayce Center in Virginia said I have a faith of knowing, and I was like, well, that's not faith at all. Faith is supposed to be without knowing. Mm-hmm. So everything I'm going to talk to you about this evening, I'm really just going to talk to you from my own experience, from the experience of people who are highly credible to me. And if you've any questions, by all means, we'll do a Q&A session in a little bit. If something does not feel right for you, then don't take it on board, right? If what I'm saying resonates and makes sense to you and is helpful to you and it helps you in where you are in your life, by all means, I hope it's useful and I hope it's helpful to you. But if you find that just really doesn't feel right for me, then just be discerning. I can't stress enough that there's a real need for people to be discerning. We have been told for far too long by the church how to think, and then we are told now by the media and by Hollywood and all of these crazy ideas about horror stories supposedly representing the afterlife, and this sort of thing gets in on your psyche over time. We've grown up with it, so it gets in on you. We've heard all sorts of things, and the unfortunate thing is that this area is an area that is ripe for fraudulence, it's ripe for neurosis and biases and conditioning and judgment and all sorts of things. So I can't stress enough, if something from me or anybody else doesn't resonate, don't take it on board. And that goes for everybody, okay? But I hope what I say, which is all from personal experience, helps you and you find it useful. And take away, or I would suggest just think about it for a while, and if it works for you, great, and if it doesn't, let it go. All right. So what I'd like to do this evening is sort of break the evening into two parts. The first part I would like to spend talking about what happens when we die. I volunteer at Hospice, in hospices. I actually trained at the Arthur Findlay College. I have accreditation from them in demonstrating mediumship, inspirational speaking, and healing mediumship. And I also have a certification and diploma in grief and bereavement counselling, because I felt that I really wanted to make sure that mediumship was healing as well, because the healing happens on both sides. It happens for those in spirit, and it happens here for the people here. So what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about, from my experience and my understanding of working with the bereaved, of working as a medium of my own first-hand. I won't even admit how many years I've been on the planet with these experiences. And also working in hospices and sitting and holding the space for people who are dying. And what that has taught me, basically, about this whole process and what happens to our loved ones when we die. And I'd like to talk a little bit also about some of the sort of major world religions, just very briefly, and what actually is consistent across world religions in terms of the afterlife. just briefly, I want to just mention a couple of things about the Bible, the Quran and the Talmud, right? Just in terms of world religions and what has been said. Because what I have found is, and I'm sure we don't really generally find this at the Edgar Casey Centre because, it's a different type of person. But I find spent a lot of time traveling throughout the South, particularly in Appalachia, and they're very, very, very opposed to the idea of communicating with spirits, and they will list Leviticus and Deuteronomy and all sorts of passages from the Bible about how you're an abomination and you're going to hell. What I have found is that on reading the book of Daniel and reading Corinthians, there are very, very clear, and I wrote them down, I don't have my glasses, but if I can read these out, I will for you. It's just where the idea of communicating with the Holy Spirit, the idea of communicating with the Spirit is actually advocated. And in a way, it's not so much, what I found in my reading of this, it's not so much that the communication with the spirit world is prohibited. It's the intention behind the communication with the spirit world seems to be where the crux of the matter is. Because in Corinthians, he actually says, pursue love and earnestly desire the spiritual gifts, especially that you may prophesy. For the one who speaks in tongues speaks not to men but to God. And nobody understands him, but he utters the mysteries of the Spirit. Now I want you to speak in tongues. And we're told all the time that we're not supposed to do this. And then if we get on to Acts and we get into the Pentecost, most of you probably, if you're Jewish or Christian, you've probably come across this, that in Acts, when they talk about the Pentecost, the Holy Spirit came down in flames on the top of people's heads and they started speaking in tongues, and that was actually lauded. So there are an awful lot of messages throughout the Bible. I have like a whole load of pages, I won't go through them all with you. But Daniel all the time is considered a prophet of God. Daniel prophesies, he sees oracles, he talks to God. Now, in the Catholic religion, we actually have the intercession of the saints. Right? Now, the saints are not angels. The saints were living people. Padre Pio, he communicated directly with spirits all the time. We're actually, for anyone here Catholic, brought up Catholic, quite a few, right? So you know that we are told, pray to St. Jude for lost causes. I probably get my saints wrong now. I'll get thrown out of Catholic school, is that right? St. Christopher for lost objects. Travelers, I knew I got it.
Anthony for lost
St. Anthony's lost dog.
Lost objects. So we're told all the time, to pray to the saints, right? Because the saints can intercede on our behalf. Right? Now, the saints were living people who walked the planet. So what is the difference between praying to the saints and asking my mother? Frankly, I have more faith in my mother doing stuff, finding things for me than St. Anthony, because I never met St. Anthony. I have no idea who St. Anthony is, right? So what is the difference between asking my mother for help and asking St. Anthony or St. Jude or whoever for help? Right? So we get to a point where, why? We get to a point where we have to look at the history of the church, and I mean, I have great respect for the church, so I'm not knocking it anyway, and I'm only talking about this in terms of this one particular area, which is communicating with spirits, and the reason for that is because our relationships with our loved ones in the spirit world do not end, their love does not die, and there is so much healing can happen for us and for them by maintaining and developing in healthy ways these relationships. And so I'm only calling this into question because I feel that if we follow and don't question this, then we end up being robbed of that experience. Now, before the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century, when Christian doctrine was actually put together in Rome, there was mediums all over the place. But after the Council of Nicaea, the law was laid down that only priests could do it from now on. Right. Which begs the question, why? Right.
Control.
Yeah. So the thing then becomes, first of all, there's a control issue. Second of all, I mean, there is a lot to be said for trying to stop people who are frauds, people who are exploiting the bereaved. There is a whole host of, there is a lot to be said for people fortune telling and telling people futures that are not set. There's a lot of things that is wrong with how the practice is conducted. But again, for me, it comes back to what I said earlier. When I started looking at the different books in the Bible, I realized that the issue is not the communicating with spirits. The issue is, what is your intention in doing it? Why are you doing it? And from what place are you coming? If you're coming from a place of, give me the lottery numbers, you know,
Frivolousness.
purely for altruistic reasons, of course.
Yeah.
But you know, if you're coming from a poor intention, if you're looking for, you know, help from one of the saints to go sort of beat the living daylights out of your neighbour, whatever the case may be, right? Obviously, our motive is not honourable, but if our motive is good, what we'll find time and time and time again in the Bible and in the Talmud is that what we are being told is it's all about is our intention for our highest good and well-being, for the highest good and well-being for another, and for the highest good and well-being of the person in spirit. That is where all of my research into this has come to, that when I looked at all of these passages, it really came down to intent. You know, there's one, so just in Daniel, because I love Daniel, because, you know, Daniel's a prophet. So Daniel, it says he was forgotten at court. He lived privately, apparently because it was so full of mercenaries and people who wanted to exploit his ability. But he was called back into court by the king because there was a problem. And one of the people explained that many people had consulted Daniel on curious questions or to explain difficult subjects, but without asking the way of salvation or the path of duty. So again, the but is, it is fine if we are doing it for salvation or duty, right? So this is what I have experienced. By all means, go pull out your old King James Bible or your Torah. I'm not Jewish, so I don't know what you have, the Torah, whatever it is. You know, and I mean, the Quran is similar. I mean, the Quran again says a very, very similar thing. I asked this I don't have the quote from the Quran. I asked this of a scholar, an Islamic scholar, that they say that these incidences of being able to commune with the spirit world happen for two reasons. One is because the practitioner is a firm believer or strictly adheres to Sharia or Islamic law. Right? And does this because this ability was gifted by Allah. And it is strengthened by truth. Or the person is misguided, right? And this is all about trickery. So again, it's very consistent across religions. What is your motive for doing it? So for me, if your heart is pure and if your desire is to help and to heal, then from everything that I can see, this is actually something that is possible. And the only thing we have been told is if this is trickery, if it's malevolent, if you're doing it for dishonorable reasons, if you're doing it to deceive, then it's not right. But then doesn't that go for everything? Mm-hmm. Bit about what I know from my experiences of dying, and this, by all means, I'll talk for about 20 minutes and then we'll do some questions on it. I can tell you a few things that I know for sure from repeated experience. No one dies alone. I have sat in more hospice rooms and I've sat with my own relatives, and there is always a gathering in the room. Any of you who have sat with a dying person, you might have noticed something strange at some point where they start staring into space.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very common. Because the simple reason that when they're at that threshold, they're seeing the living and the dead simultaneously because they're between worlds. The same way as children are. This is the other thing about communicating with the spirits. It's very, very common for children to sit and have conversations with the spirit world. Well, we can't say that the children are evil or have malevolent intent. The children, right? If it was wrong, why would children be able to do that? They're innocent. This happens all the time. And the reason why I want to bring that up is because people often worry quite a lot about their loved one. Are they okay? I can't tell you the amount of people I've done mediumship sittings for. And their primary reason for coming was they were so worried, was their loved one okay? Especially if it's a child. Right? Are they okay? My next door neighbour came running into me in Dublin. It's amazing in Dublin, nobody will talk about this, but as soon as they know you're a medium, they'll all come over and have a quick cup of tea with you. And on the quiet, tell you all their stories. You know, I think everyone in Ireland is a medium. They're just closeted. They just have fun. You know. So my neighbour comes running in, and she's her husband. I was home at the time. It's just after my own mother died. She came running into me, and she goes, "Is he okay? Did he make it?" And I'm like, "Make it where? Did he make it to the spirit world?" I'm like, "Of course he made it to the spirit world." Like, but she actually honestly thought, because she had believed for so long that somehow there was a journey between here and there, and you could get lost on the way. I'm saying, he didn't die alone. I mean, if any of you have children here in the room, all right, so if you're a child, if you're now off, just say for me, let's promote you to the spirit world for a few minutes, and you're in the spirit world now, and your child has reached a point where they're about to pass, would you just go off on vacation in the spirit world, let them go alone, let them find their way to you by themselves? Of course not. You'd be at the bed. You'd be at the bed to take their hand and help them on their way. So the idea that spirits get lost, or they get earthbound and they can't escape. I heard somebody one time, somebody came to me because her son, who was only 15 or 16, had committed suicide. And this was a few weeks beforehand. And this woman came in for a reading. She was in a terrible state of distress, because some medium had told her that because her son committed suicide, he was now earthbound and lost forever. 3 weeks after her teenage son had committed suicide. Can you imagine the pain this woman was in already? And then this person tells them this. And I'm like, what actually happened? We know that there was a whole gathering of the family to come for him. What did they do? Somewhere from here to the spirit world, whoever was holding his hand let go. And they all showed up in the spirit world and went, wait, who was supposed to be holding his hand? Like, this doesn't even make sense. You know? So, no, people don't get lost with that. I will say that some people choose not to advance spiritually in the spirit world. And so maybe that's what people perceive as, you know, they're earthbound, they're staying close to the earth. But how many people on the earth choose not to advance spiritually? It's a choice. We choose whether or not we want to actually do that, we want to grow, or we choose we don't, not to. And the same goes in the spirit world, right? Just to talk for a few minutes about what major religions say about the spirit world, and Edgar Casey as well, because this really comes back to Edgar Casey too. The ancient religions of Mesopotamia and Babylonia all believed in 7 heavens. There are 7 heavens. Now, whether the 7 heavens are really 7 heavens, or they're like God created the earth in 7 days, like how long is the day, I don't know. But typically, people, you know, most major religions have believed in 7 heavens. Hinduism believes in 14, 7 higher and 7 lower. Right? We know that there are accounts of Muhammad traveling through the 7 worlds. And in the Talmud, the Jewish scholars have done quite a lot of work on the 7 heavens. And actually, is anybody here Jewish? Because if I'm pronouncing any of this wrong, let me know. Enoch travels through the 7 heavens and gives a geographical and visual documentation of them. He gets to see the Garden of Eden and the 3rd heaven on his way to meet the Lord in the 7th heaven. So in other words, in that tradition, we're in the 1st world and God is the 7th world, and we're all making our way back to the 7th world. In Corinthians, there is actually an account of Paul's trip into the 3rd heaven. It says, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the 3rd heaven, whether in body or out of body, we do not know. So even in the Christian Bible, there are accounts of multiple heavens, and we know. So in most, and then in the more of the smaller, the less populated religions, it's very, very similar, you know. And so when we started getting closer to our own time, a very, very great scholar, Swedish scholar, Emanuel Swedenborg, wrote very extensively on this. And he, at that time in the 1700s, believed that we were in some ways morally responsible for communicating with the spirit world. But for him, at that point in the middle 1700s, he believed that we should be communicating with the spirit world with God, with the Holy Spirit, and it should be for spiritual reasons and for sacred reasons. Now, when we get a little bit closer to our own time, we've come up with Andrew Jackson Davis, who was from right here actually in New York, and up in Poughkeepsie, and he's considered the sort of John the Baptist of the spiritualist movement because he sort of talked about it beforehand. Now, there are a lot of parallels between him and Edgar Cayce, and in fact, the Edgar Cayce Library in Virginia houses the entire collection of Andrew Jackson Davis's work. But Andrew Jackson Davis predated Edgar Cayce, and he also did what Edgar Cayce did. He would travel to the spirit world and he would come back with wisdom. In fact, he came back with scientific information that wasn't proven until like the 1800s, like nearly 100 years later. He came back with ideas on electricity. He actually came back with evolutionary theories of evolution before Darwin had written them, that he had picked up in what he called the Summerland, one of the heavens. So if we amalgamate all of this together, what it all suggests, and this is very consistent with my own experience as well, is that we are here on the first plane of existence, and that God is in the seventh plane of existence. And that what we do as we go is we die from the seventh plane, or from the first plane, into the second plane. And we continue our spiritual growth in the second plane. And eventually into the third plane. And on we go. And as we advance, we start to lose ego, we start to lose sort of sense of this particular body. These sorts of things start to fall away. And we move gradually closer to the source. Now, I found this in probably a lot of you have sensed your loved one around you immediately after you passed, and probably for a few months, and then over time it sort of faded. Right? It's very common. Because what happens is, and I find this myself, even though I can communicate with people, I find myself with my own partner and my mother, that when they die initially, it's really, really easy. I mean, it's like almost like get out of the way, I'll bump into you sort of thing. The presence is so strong. But over time, it gets lighter. So it's not like they have left you or abandoned you. It's just that their energy signature, their vibration, is a little bit lighter. Because initially, when we die, and there's lots of accounts of this in the near-death experience literature, is that initially when we die, we hold on to our etheric body, which is kind of like it's like a version, it's like a little hologram of us. Right? Because how on earth could we, any of us, at this point on this plane of existence, possibly understand what it's like to be in a place where there is no such thing as space nor time? Because those dimensions are physical world dimensions, right? So you've probably heard this a lot from the people who've done DMT and ayahuasca and LSD, that like so all of a sudden like they're out on this adventure and they're so disorientated because all of a sudden they're out, there's no space and no time, and now there's no body. What are you supposed to do? I mean, how much getting used to it would it take? Quite a lot. Oh, it'll take me quite a lot, I know. And so we go through a process initially of being in what's called the etheric body, until we get to a point where we actually start to get used to this new plane without space-time, without this physicality. And it goes. And so what it seems like is that for that initial period of time, when our loved one's energy is denser, it's closer to physical energy, it's easier for us to sense them and communicate with them, because there's not that great a difference in the density or in the vibrational level. Does that make sense for everybody? And as they get more acclimatized and get used to this new dimension they're in, that will fall away. And when that falls away, the difference in our vibration just gets a little bit further away, so it's harder for us to sense them. Right? If you find that, I've seen a lot of people get distressed because they're like, I felt my husband, or I felt my child, or I felt my mother, whoever, very strongly initially, and now I don't feel them at all, and they think they've been abandoned, or they've left, or they've gone somewhere and they're gone. That's not the truth at all. All that's happened is that the vibrational resonance has changed, because if that was the truth, the medium wouldn't even be able to reach them. you know. So they are still around, and this is why we give the other talk, which is how to develop a relationship with them, how to recognize the signs. If you can't feel them, they will still be giving you signs. You will still, if you ask for help, you'll probably notice a strange synchronicity that somehow, wow, that's kind of unusual. That's them orchestrating to show you what it is they're trying to tell you, because they're not able to match your vibrational level enough to directly communicate with you. Right? So what they can do though is manipulate. Like lots of people find lots of things, like my granddad used to give us pennies when we were kids, you know,
Yes.
always give us pennies. And then after he dies, pennies everywhere, you know.
Pennies of heaven.
Yeah, it's true, they do that. And it's not just pennies, like, but there's all sorts
Nickels,
of, all
quarters,
sorts of
dimes,
things. Anything.
dollars.
Hummingbirds are very common. People see that a lot. And it's very common when it's significant. I had a woman one time who committed suicide, and she kind of barged in one time in the park when I was with a friend of mine, and very rarely happens to me, but she obviously was desperate to get a message to her family. And the person I was sitting with was a friend of her daughter's. So I described her to him, and he was like, that sounds like my friend's mother. And as he was, once he caught it, we realised who it was. A hummingbird came and fluttered by our heads and shot off. And I thought, wow, isn't that really cool? I actually realised I'd never seen a real hummingbird before until that. It was kind of like startling because they're like super fast. And when he went home, he checked all these details, and the husband apparently had told him, he didn't know this, and he told me, was that the woman had hummingbird feeders all over the garden, you know. So the hummingbird was particularly significant for her. So usually what they choose to show you that they're around will have some relevance to them. You'll recognize it. If you ask for help, if you ask for some guidance, if you know, you'll start to see synchronicities, and it will start to make sense to you, or just something will happen where it just like penny drops, you know. Oh, that makes sense. Because they're sort of up there in the spirit world moving stuff around to try to get in front of you so you see it, you know. And that's what, because I can tell you that they never leave you. Now, I'm not saying the sitting around all day, like Beetlejuice. Remember that movie? They used to just sit around waiting to come back. Not saying that at all. It's very clear from the literature, it's very clear from my experience with this and how I've noticed, say my mother changed, my partner changed. I've seen changes in them incrementally over the years, you know. Things, for instance, my partner could not do, emotional issues, shall we say, to be polite, that he had. I actually can see now how those have changed. I can see how those have changed in him, how clearly there has been healing going on with him, you know, in the last whatever number of years. And so it's very clear that people do have lives there as we do here. So if we start thinking of the next plane of existence as more similar to this than we realize. I don't know that they pay rent, but they clearly have lives, and there clearly is development, and there clearly is learning, you know. And so, but here we weren't glued to each other all day, every day. People went off to work, they went out with their friends here and there. We all had our lives separate, and we had our lives together, and that's how it is. We have our lives separately, and we have our lives together. I can tell you, if there is someone you love in the spirit world who loves you, and you ask them, are they there, can they help you, I can tell you that it's hyper thought responsive. Within seconds they are there, whether you realize that they're there or not. I always say to people, your loved one is only ever a thought away, and that's the truth, a thought away, you know. Now, they're not going to skid in and start playing the puppet master in your life and living your life for you, but if you ask for help, they will move whatever they need to move to get you that help. Right? What you don't want to do is start getting into dependency issues where you can't do anything for yourself. Right? This needs to be healthy. Right? But nevertheless, the relationship continues to exist. As we progress, I mean, Edgar Cayce has quite a lot of very vivid accounts of what they were calling at the time near-death experiences, which I think Robert Monroe has reframed out-of-body experiences since. Where he talked in great description about entire worlds and houses. I don't know if you've read this, but like really incredible detail about the lives that have been constructed there, that people live there, that similarly liked communities of people gather and create realities. And Robert Monroe and Will Bowman from the Monroe Institute has also talked about this, of whole communities who have built new communities, where he has actually gone into it. William Bowman has a great story. He took over teaching the OB program after Robert Monroe died at the Monroe Institute in Virginia. And he has the great story of having an out-of-body experience and kind of zooming into a church in the spirit world and scaring the life out of the people in the church, in the spirit world. And I would say, isn't that fantastic? Isn't that fantastic? Where whole worlds of communities of people come together and create these thought-responsive worlds. We'll probably find when we get to the spirit world that our world is probably just the same, only we are so conditioned to think that we are separate individuals from each other. We're all separate things, which the Buddhists, of course, have long known that's not the case. That we'll realise that's the way it really was here all the time too. So people do get on with their lives. When we start getting into more sort of esoteric terms, the guides, a lot of you probably work with guides or know you have guides or angels or guardian angels, so lots of people have different names for them. Typically what is going on there, I've got a whole bunch of guides that I work with because they do different things and they work with me in different ways, is that the guides are coming from the third or fourth plane. They're very, very, very advanced, way beyond ego, way beyond much closer to the source than us, and they've advanced that far. And they choose to come back and help us here. And it's said, although I don't know this for sure because my guides haven't personally told me this, but it's understood that our development also is their development as they move their way back to the source as well. So we have definitely, people often ask me, is my mother my guide? Well, your loved ones will be your helpers because your loved ones are not that far from you. If we're in the first plane, they're only in the second plane. And we know from Edgar Cayce, and this is very consistent with my own experience, that Edgar Cayce talked about we're all born in soul groups. And there could be 200 people in a soul group. And we all incarnate and then go back, incarnate at different times, go back at different times, and that nobody comes back again until the whole soul group has made it back to the spirit world, right? To share the knowledge, right? And so our soul group can be our helpers, and our soul group generally involves the people nearest and dearest to us. So they will be our helpers, and they will always help you, always help you. And it doesn't necessarily mean that if somebody helped you here on earth, they will help you in the spirit world. Of course they will. But sometimes if you, say, had a father who was particularly unhelpful, or a father who abandoned the family or disappeared, sometimes you'll find that they will suddenly be very helpful in the spirit world. Why? Because they have done a life review. They have seen what's going on, and they recognize that healing needs to be done. And this is an opportunity for them to come and heal themselves and also heal the situation that they left behind. So this is what I mean about the ongoing relationship has all of these healing possibilities for us and for them. Once we develop these relationships in a healthy way. So the life review I just sort of skipped over quite quickly, but you've probably come across this idea that we get to the spirit world and somehow we're shown all our ways for good and ill, and all our choices throughout our lives and how we impacted other people. I know that the near-death experience literature talks about that quite a lot. I will say, as a medium, I actually do what I have seen in the people closest to me that went to the spirit world. I have definitely seen evidence of that. The thing about reincarnation is that there really does seem to be very compelling evidence of it. I've read Ian Stevenson's case studies. Dr. Ian Stevens has done some very compelling work on reincarnation cases, and there really does seem to be very compelling evidence for it. How often we reincarnate? I mean, the Buddhists believe the bardo is only, I think, 49 days or something very short, and then we come back. I don't believe we reincarnate like that at all. I believe that we can, and I don't believe we all reincarnate either. I feel that, I did some past life regressions, And I think I had, the last one was 496. So I don't feel we all just sort of boomeranging in and out of this planet. To answer your question,
I have a question. What has been your experience with those who have had Alzheimer's and who then transition?
yeah, that's I actually have communicated with Alzheimer's people a few times, and what usually happens is that the initial communication can be sort of murky and sort of difficult. But usually what I have found is that they're actually giving me that as evidence that they had some form of dementia because their thinking wasn't clear. And as soon as I identify that and I say to the person, I'm having trouble thinking clearly, did your father, whoever, have dementia or Alzheimer's? And they say yes. As soon as we acknowledge that piece of evidence, the thinking gets clear, because what they were trying to do was just give it to me as evidence. So in other words, it's not taken with them. And I actually believe there have been scientific studies where they have shown that the personality of the Alzheimer's patient remains intact, even though the neural pathways are breaking down.
How much influence do you think in this life, the first plane you said we're in?
Yeah.
How much influence do the dark entities have and the extraterrestrials that share this planet with us? I mean, in the spirit world, there is evil people that float around. I'm not talking about Lucifer. I don't want to start with that. People want to go crazy with this stuff. Dark presence. People are like occupy the body of Hitler and how much influence do they have on us and macro and societorial?
Well, some of what you said I don't actually believe in, but just to address the question of badness or evil, is there are bad people in this planet. They will die. People don't change. They'll get to the spirit world. There'll be bad people in the spirit world. Whether they choose to heal and grow spiritually, that is their choice, right? I have never actually, fortunately, ever had to communicate with somebody. I have actually had people who were abusive parents and stuff come back. But usually when they choose to come back, they're choosing to come back to try to help somebody heal. The thing is that there seems to be a vibrational resonance. If somebody has a very, very, very low vibration, and this goes, we all know for here too, if you have a very low vibration, you're going to resonate with people with the same vibration, right? So like attracts like. So if you're resonating at a fairly decent positive vibration, you're not going to be able to resonate down here. Same way as, if we're here, we can't really resonate up where the guides are because they're so advanced from us. We'll resonate on vibrations that we are on ourselves.
And extraterrestrial?
I can't comment about that. I really can't, sorry. Yes. Yes.
You mentioned before that someone who passed needs healing.
Mm-hmm.
How could someone who died need healing?
We die, we don't change. We're the same person when we die. We don't suddenly get to the spirit world and sprout wings. We are the same person continuing in a very fluid and a very linear growth back towards the Great Spirit, back towards the Spirit. So we will leave this world and we will arrive in the next world with the issues that we had here. And in the next world, we have an opportunity to heal them, which is why I was saying a lot of the time, our loved ones, the fact that they can come back, they can actually, if they can actually continue to help us in this life, helping us heal from what they did also helps them heal. Does that make sense to you? Transition between worlds is a lot more fluid than we believe. And we've been kind of told, we're here, and then they go off there someplace, into the light someplace. And what I'm saying is that we really have evolved to a sense in the 21st century where we understand so many advances, just even in the nature of this reality, that we have to question those beliefs from hundreds of years ago. And so what I'm saying is that the progression between worlds is a lot more fluid than we have been told historically it is.
It's about if you go to the Civil War battlefield and you can still see them roaming around. Does that mean that they're still trying to heal or okay.
What that actually is, and this happens everywhere. I've gone down to, actually with Michelle here, I think we've both gone down to, those new lofts that used to be sweatshops down in Tribeca.
Mhm. Yes,
You know,
yes.
women jumped out and they burned
Yep.
up. And now they're these really
Triangle.
smooth, high-tech,
Mhm.
like internet companies and computer companies, and you walk in and it's just space and clear and beautiful and bright. And the minute you walk out of the elevator, you can feel the energy from the sweatshop. It's the same thing. What it is an energetic residue. It's not the women aren't there. It's the energetic residue that has been imprinted on that space for all of those years. And so this happens quite a lot in that. So it's the difference between a ghost and a spirit. A spirit is an intelligence, it's a person, it's an individual that was here who's now out, discarnate out of their body. A ghost, there is no intelligence, it's just an energetic imprint. So often when people report ghosts, they'll report the ghost walks down the same corridor all the time. Doesn't do anything else, right? Just keeps walking down the same corridor. Because there's no intelligence in it, right? What it is, it's an energetic imprint that you may clairvoyantly receive, or in the case of the sweatshops, you'll just clairsentiently receive, the sense of that energetic imprint. That's what that is. So no, there's no soldiers still acting out Civil War battles. What it is the trauma that happened on those battlefields, the energy of the trauma on those battlefields is imprinted into that space. And that's why we can keep... Do you ever see on TV and stuff, they do these recordings of, like, we caught a spirit on camera?
Oh, yeah.
And the spirit does the same thing, runs around the same tree, that's all they do, keep running around the same tree. It's the same thing, it's just an energetic imprint. And sometimes the imprint will manifest as something we sense, and sometimes it'll manifest as something that we can see or we can hear. Sometimes people hear babies crying, that it's an energy imprint. It's just using one of the psychic faculties. That's how we're recognizing the imprint is there. Does that make sense? Okay. I mean, everybody's death is different. Some people die very, very lingering deaths. Some people hang on and they don't want to go. Some people are gone first opportunity. Some people have accidents and they're gone immediately. So are you talking about the process of dying? Well, the process of dying varies with an individual, depending on how they die. Some people are going to be really afraid and some people won't be afraid, because some people will have faith and some people won't have faith. I have actually seen in every case, and you may know this as well from working in hospice, I've never seen a person at the moment of death look afraid. I've seen them be really afraid leading up to that moment, but at that moment I haven't seen them be afraid. So I feel it's because at that moment on that threshold, because there's a gathering, their experience is different than before the gathering. Because when they think they're on their own, they don't know where they're going. Right? Does that make sense?